Namaste, salam, shubratri, sham bakhair, all those good things. Good day here from Australia. Welcome to our second roundtable of the Teaching South Asian Languages in 2020 event. This evening, our roundtable is going to focus on the modern languages of South Asia. This event is organized as part of the Global Festival of Asia Pacific Language and Culture Education. This is a flagship event organized by the School of Culture, History and Language in the College of Asia and the Pacific at the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. We are fortunate to be joined today in today's roundtable and in yesterday's roundtable by educators in South Asian languages from Australia, Singapore, Pakistan, Germany, United States, and beyond. My name is Christopher Diamond. I am lecturer in Hindi here at the ANU. And today I'll be helping to manage all of the technical bits of our webinar tonight, and along with Peter, moderating some of our discussion. Before we begin other things, I'd like to first acknowledge the people from whose country we are broadcasting at the very least, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and all of the other Indigenous communities of Australia and the Torres Strait Islands. We'd like to pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Before we turn it over to our really engaging discussion, just a few housekeeping things. Today's roundtable will be held by our appointed discussants who will meet in a moment. There will be two moderators, myself and Peter. The rest who have joined us in the event tonight are attendees in the Zoom webinar, so your camera and microphone have been turned off. But don't worry, there's a function at the very bottom of your Zoom screen in the question and answers panel. Please type all of your questions. I'm sure there'll be many there. We'll be sure to answer those either at the end of our event or as we see fit. We'll either type responses or answer them out loud. And at the end, we'll have a dedicated portion of our discussion that'll be questions and answers, which if we have time, I might be able to allow you to have your microphone turned on for a moment to ask your questions out loud. Anything typed into the chat box will not be answered in that way, so please make sure you type it into the questions and answers, the Q&A box. The chat box will be for prompting questions and technical bits. So I'd like to turn it over to Peter to do the rest of the introductions.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. And one of the extraordinary things is to be here. Now, what does that mean? Because we're all in different places around the world speaking to each other. And I'd just like to say something about, I suppose it was sometime around January that we started talking about what we would do as an event for this year, because last year we had a conference on campus where we got a whole bunch of people together to talk about innovative language teaching. And this year we were thinking, oh, we'll have another one of them. But then we realized, no, we won't have another one of them in exactly the same format. So we went through a kind of iterative process, you could say, where all the academics got together and talked about all the different ways that we might be able to hold some sort of event. And it seemed that every time we held one of these meetings, the circumstances would change as well. We'd imagine that perhaps we could all meet on different university campuses and talk campus to campus, and then by the time we met again a fortnight later, we'd realize, no, we'd probably all have to be talking from our homes. And then we started to realize as well that what might work very well for a panel which was working on Japanese language teaching or Indonesian language teaching might be very different from what might work with South Asian language teaching. So we moved towards this idea that we would have an initial round of kind of interviews in which Chris and I and Maconis and Steph would do a video interview with people through Zoom, and we'd create a kind of archive of conversations. And then on top of that, we do what we're going to do today, which is to sit around here. And it's now become, we always used to call it a round table, but this is the square boxes, isn't it, really? So we'd have these two different formats. Exactly, letterboxes. It always reminds me of the Brady Bunch if we move up to 9 participants, which is another way of doing it. Which is an old TV show that started with 9 boxes with all the different people in it. And then also we hope that some of the material things that we talk about during this session and during your interviews, we might share with each other some of the links to things that we talk about, which are particularly of interest. And we also hope that maybe going forwards, the part of the CHL School of Cultural History and Language idea about the Global Festival is we'll end up with a kind of a website which will be a place in which people can come and look at what took place in this event and the other events in the Global Festival. It's not a good idea to call it a conference, so we call it the Global Festival. And so that will be another aspect of something, which is how can we explore doing something which is not the same as saying, oh, we're going to try and reproduce an everyday conference online. So please, everybody come along and sit in front of your computer for 8 hours in a row, which I'm not sure is the best way of doing it. So hopefully this is a good approach to try and break it up into different parts. And it's a great pleasure to be here to talk with all of you. I should just finish off by introducing myself to any of you who haven't met me, which is something quite normal, I imagine. So my name is Peter Friedlander, and I'm here at the moment as an associate professor at the Australian National University and teach South Asian Studies and Hindi language. And what else should I say? Oh, I've been involved in teaching online Hindi since about 1997. Although in 1997 it wasn't called online Hindi, it was called distance education Hindi. So I've been involved in teaching Hindi not on campus, but going back to the days when at least we did do this thing where we sent cassette tapes to people with printed books. And then people had to audio record things on cassette tapes and send them to us. So I've seen a few changes in the technologies. And it's wonderful that we can take advantage of the current Zoom technology to hold an event like this. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Kristen.
Well, I'd first like to, we've had our individual video interviews that some of our attendees might have seen or might have not seen. So could I take this moment to ask all of our participants just to give a short introduction of themselves, your names, where you are, all that stuff, and we'll get down to business. I'll pitch it to Divya first. You're at the top of my screen.
All right. Namaste. Mera naam, oh, sorry, I just started in Hindi. My name is Divya. I'm Divya. I'm at Vanderbilt University, Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a senior lecturer in Hindi and Urdu languages here. And I also teach courses in South Asian culture.
Fantastic. And perhaps Sandhya ji?
Namaste, I'm Sandhya. I teach in NUS, National University of Singapore, and basically I'm lecturer of Hindi, but I look after Hindi and Tamil languages, so convener of both the languages. Yeah, I think that's all.
Nice. And Gwen?
Hi everyone, I'm Gwen Kirk and I'm an assistant professor at Lahore University of Management Sciences in Lahore, Pakistan. I actually don't teach language here, but I'm the language pedagogy coordinator for Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Pashto, Panjabi, and Sindhi. And I teach Urdu every summer at the University of Wisconsin-Madison at Sassley, and I've taught at other universities. I've taught Urdu in the past.
Fantastic. And Ian?
Yes, hello everyone. Good morning and good evening. I'm Ian Woolford, and I'm the Hindi lecturer at Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. And like Divya, I also teach subjects in South Asian culture. And my background is in literature, modern Hindi literature.
Thanks, everybody. Peter, you had some questions. I'm hoping that we can all just kind of freely discuss and talk amongst one each other. But Peter, would you like to get us started in something to ponder over?
Well, I think one of the things that we could start by pondering over is an additional question to the main ones that I've thought of, but it's the first question really that everybody is faced with this year, which is how are you adapting to the new circumstances we find ourselves in? And what are the ways in which you've been able to overcome challenge for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, going suddenly online. And Chris, shall we do it by just asking, should we go with the same order of people, or shall we just kind of?
Yeah, that works fine.
Yeah. So Divya, would you like to talk about the challenges? But you were saying, in fact, you're partly on campus teaching as well.
I am, yes. So we spent the entire summer training and preparing for a completely online instruction, because at that time we did not know whether we would be fully online or partially online. And then we started teaching in person in fall, in August. So I go to campus 4 days a week, where I meet with my students. Some of them are joining remotely, but majority of them are in class. So you would have students, for instance, 4 of them are online, while the rest of them are in class. It has been interesting. It has been interesting to see what you had planned being carried out. And a lot of times there have been adjustments that had to be made. So for instance, one of the things I've realized is in my classes where there are more online students, it takes much, much longer to do the same thing that we did in a section where we had only one student online. So it has been regularly managing just my expectations of time, how we use class time. That has been a huge adjustment, but also, I don't know about others, it just does not feel as satisfying, honestly, every interaction, but I think we're getting better. Students are getting better at navigating breakout rooms. Now that we have systems set up, it has been getting a lot easier. We use Google Documents or Excel sheets to manage discussion while students are in breakout rooms. So even if I can't go to every breakout room, I can in real time see what they are doing just by looking at their responses. So I think it's getting better. I think I mentioned to Chris and Peter in our last conversation that we also like to use the Zoom renaming function, so that students could take on roles based on their new names and age and any other identifying information that they include. So I think we're just learning how to make better use of technology. We use discussion boards. The learning management system that we use is Brightspace. So we use discussion boards also to have video discussions and not just have everything typed and give feedback like that. So I think it is not the same, definitely, but we are finding ways to do things, to accomplish things that we had in the past. So right now, that's where we are at 4 weeks in.
Amazing, and it's fascinating to hear such a range of different responses, basically, to the situation. So, Chris, I think it was. Should we go to Sandhya now?
Sandhya, I think, yeah.
Yeah, Sandhya.
Okay. So we are fully online, and like from in month of May, after May, kind of we had this feeling that, I mean, in a way, university announced that we are going fully online. So May and June and part of July, there were a lot of courses, a lot of things arranged to train us, equip us to take full online classes. We are a bit trained, we know few things, but still we are learning when we are physically taking the classes. I mean, when we are literally taking the classes, every day something new come up, some new challenges are coming up. Every week we are finding something new and using that. Like breakout room, I have started using recording mode. I mean, they record whatever they discuss, they record as an audio. And when they come out of, because I can't be in all the breakout room at one time, and sometime I notice that when I enter, they just suddenly keep quiet. So, and after that they start discussing again. So that's how we thought, okay, you record whatever you are talking, just record using your phone, because they use a lot of instruments. I mean we have certain things which they can use. So when they are here, at least I can listen what exactly they were discussing. They were using all Hindi, they were using all English, they were using mix, or they were talking, So those kind of things are coming up, new things which we are adding to find out the challenges. The challenges, what I found, when I give them something to, not as a group, they are speaking wise, I find breakout rooms are working quite well. I mean, they are doing same, not physical. I mean, of course, the physical, presence in a class is definitely different, but that also working quite well. Only thing, if I ask them to create some, because some writing also they should do, they should be doing, we are introducing that as well, or even higher classes. So we do certain writing in class as well, just few lines, so that I'm finding it a bit boring and a bit, so we are modifying that as well, because that's some students finding it boring while they are doing online, because they have to look at the screen and all those things. So these kind of challenges. Otherwise, online classes, initially I thought it would be very challenging to teach a new language, especially for beginners. But somehow changing a bit of pedagogy, using more audio materials, more video functions, it's giving us a lot of room to experiment. And in my 5 weeks of teaching, because we are just 5 weeks in this semester, I have noticed that, that's personally maybe my experience, that they are at the almost similar level which I do in campus. Not much difference, which because the beginners are the best to judge whether what we were doing and what we are doing, is it, I mean, are they getting the same kind of thing? So that's what I feel. And even higher level modules, more discussion and all that going on. And yes, sometimes that class presence is not there, that moving around, doing some dancing and all that, like in Hindi classes. I mean, all of us are aware that we use a lot of popular numbers, we use a lot of popular media, so those things are restricted a bit. We try, I mean, we are trying here and there, but not exactly. And more about recently we had this Hindi day. If we were in campus, we would have done it in a bigger manner. They would have set up some stall, these things and all those. So that definitely we couldn't do. So those kind of extra where they learn more, I feel if we do something extra, they learn more. Those things definitely we are missing. But learning a language is going, and they are more interested in, like, a lot of, as I said, audio and video. And we are doing a lot of, even for their work, we are using a lot of audio. They are doing a lot of audio recording for their work instead of writing, because that writing is not working that well for beginners. So they are using more audio recordings and sending us. So not bad so far, I have realized.
Thank you so much, Sandhya. And it's interesting that this writing and audio recordings and extra materials, different kind of resources or issues which are coming up. Gwendolyn, your responses to this kind of topic as well would be fascinating to hear.
Yeah, I'm just as, just as happened with everybody's interviews, I'm hearing so many echoes of my own experience, and it's honestly so satisfying to know that other people are like thinking of this, or experiencing it in the same way. So I mean, I really so at LUMS in the summer I was teaching at SASLI, and we used Canvas, which had a lot of kind of like bells and whistles. But my teachers here at LUMS, some of them are using Teams, and some of them are using our own LMS, which is doesn't have like a lot of those functionalities that some of the kind of fancier LMSs do. And so one thing that has happened here a lot is adapting over multi platforms, many different platforms. So teachers are using Facebook and WhatsApp and other discussion boards, other external apps and things, which is, and I feel like even when I was using one platform, Canvas, in the summer, I feel like it's a lot of work initially to set it up. It's a lot of effort in the first few days to figure out, you have to rethink not only your teaching, but all of your assessments. You have to, we had issues, so many issues with like cheating at the initial shift, because the teachers had, you know, the teachers had all planned, we had all planned, right, for our regular semester, and then suddenly going online in March, right? And so none of us had to think about assessments in that way, that what if a student is just home alone doing their exam, what would happen, you know? And so rethinking assessments, not necessarily just to stop cheating, but also to kind of make them reflect more the updated ways that we're teaching things. I actually think it's been a great silver lining that I am not using a textbook very much anymore in my teaching. I'm not really I mean, it's there, you know, but I think, you know, if I had, I mean, I would not have put this much effort into it earlier, into making my own materials and really being creative about the kinds of activities and things I made. And it, you know, over the summer, it was a huge pain, and I was spending hours and hours every day making so many things. But now I don't think I would want to go back to teaching the way I was before, where I was very heavily reliant on a textbook. And in a way, it was very, although, you know, I mean, we all try, but I taught very much the way that I learned, which was, you know, kind of your classic, like doing drills from Usha Jain in the first year and this kind of thing, which are great, but we know that there's a lot more that can be done. And so the way that technology, you know, the way Sandhya ji was just talking about experimenting in different things, and the way that's opened up so many avenues is huge. And I mean, I think for me, one of the biggest places is, and this is another point that Sandhya ji also brought up, was on the one hand, there's the difficulty of using authentic materials in the way we used to in an in-person classroom. But on the other hand, and maybe this wouldn't have been possible, you know, when I was learning Urdu, however many decade and a half or whatever ago. But on the other hand, we can think of so many tasks for students to use the authentic materials that exist on the internet themselves independently. You know, and I've given my students tasks on Google Maps and on TripAdvisor and, you know, on all kinds of different, even on social media, you can think of different kinds of tasks where they can really engage with authentic target culture materials and stuff and language in doing a variety of tasks, right? So that has been one other initial challenge, that like, I can't show them a film song the way I would have done. It's not going to work the same way in an online classroom to tell everybody, okay, you guys go to YouTube, and that, you know, it doesn't work. But thinking of new and interesting things that wouldn't have worked in an in-person classroom where I don't allow laptops even. So it's totally, it's just been a complete shift that's been very challenging, but also I think really probably quite good for my teaching anyway. It's been refreshing, a lot of work, but refreshing.
A lot of work, but refreshing is a great kind of summing up as well for what's going on with all this design for everybody at the moment. And what about Ian? For 2020, yes. Ian, what about the experience there in?
Again, I don't know.
Yeah, here in Melbourne. Yeah, Peter, when you started asking the question, how are you all adapting to the change? I thought you were just going to ask the question I'm asking at the beginning of every class now, which is just how are you? I'm just having to do this so much more. How are you? And I've even made a point, this is our 5 minutes where we just check in, because it is students, faculty, staff, everyone is under just a huge amount of stress right now. I've never been in a situation like this before. I haven't been to the office since March. Our campus has been closed. Everything has gone remote for the past month, 2 months. I don't even know. Melbourne has been under some of the most severe lockdown restrictions on the world. I think even the most severe. We're under curfew, we can't leave the house. So students are really, it's applying pressures in all kinds of new ways. In terms of teaching and learning, it's made me have to rethink, well, what is the value of being with an instructor in a classroom? What is the value of that? What is the value of being with other students? and you know, I've just been thinking, what can I do? Okay, what are the things that I do with students in a class that, okay, I can just put that up online in a video, in a PowerPoint. What do they get? What do they get from together? And just really being in lockdown like this, when our worlds are in danger of becoming so small right now. If you can't leave your house, if you live alone, our world's in danger of becoming so small. I think language learning is something quite special because it's larger. It gives us new ways of thinking of the world. It gives us new ways of describing how we exist in the world. So this is something I think, okay, this is something that we need to focus on when we're together. How can we do this? Especially when the world, when it feels like it's falling apart, when we do take our little 1 hour of outdoor exercise, I think that's something very special, that's something very valuable, and that's something where a language class has a real chance to do something special for students bit by bit. Every day they're learning something new. It's often, especially that first year level, it's a tangible difference. You know, from week 1 to week 5, suddenly we can talk about ourselves. We can describe who we are. This is quite exciting. I tell my students I'm quite jealous of them that they're getting to learn a language. I wish I could do this. So I think it's something quite special, especially for the situation we're in now. So it just made me refocus on that. What is the actual value of this? And I'm hoping on the other side of it, that's what I'll be able to take out from this and bring back to face-to-face classes.
Thank you. And that's a really profound point about it. It actually makes us think about the fundamental activity we're involved in. What is education really about in this world? And it's not really simply about the delivery of the syllabus or going through the textbook, because it sometimes was structured. I agree. It's really about being. I think about it as well as that in the first year in the Hindi class or the language class, possibly, students were gaining the skills to talk about their own lives with each other and learn about all that shared experience. So, Chris, you've got some things for you as well. I like the way that you're now in 3 scripts as well. That's very good.
Yeah, I was just going off of what Divya said with playing with the name boxes. Related to kind of the point that Ian had brought up and kind of something that I was thinking about more after we had conducted our one-on-one interview and things that, you know, there are some efforts here at the ANU to think more about this, but what is the changed nature of our duty of care for students? You know, I've been doing a few seminars with people that are not language teachers, where the kind of types of interaction that you have with students is very different. You know, we tend to give a lot of ourselves in a language class, you know, details about our lives, very minute things like this is my cat, this is my house, especially nowadays. But I was interested that in talks I've had with other people, they're challenged by striking a balance. Some students pull away in times like this and just kind of want privacy and want the kind of reassurance of turning their camera off or something like that. Some students want to share like even more. So it's kind of, I found it challenging, and people I've talked to, I found it challenging. How do we strike a balance between making ourselves available and give off the vibe that we're open and we're caring, but create a space where students themselves and ourselves can be kind of safe and don't have to engage in that if they don't want to. So any thoughts from anyone on that topic? It's something that's been interesting to me recently.
Could we just do a quick around, see, like, is there anyone who insists that people have cameras on or off? Like, I'm fine with if students have cameras off and make that clear, and I don't need a reason or anything like that, but I can certainly understand why that might be difficult with certain activities or things. So has that come up with anyone else?
At least for me, I tell students, you don't need to tell me a reason. Just if you're going to attend today without a camera, just let me know or type to me in the chat like, hey, my camera's going to be off today. So I can plan like breakout rooms and things like that, but they don't need to give me a reason or anything.
Yeah, same for us in Singapore. But normally students they turn on their cameras, and if they don't, and they do write personally in chat box, okay, I'm not going to switch on today for, and I don't ask the reason. I said you don't have to, as Chris said. So we give this freedom. If they want, they don't switch on. But normally language classes, so far I have seen, I mean, apart from one very rare case when the student had something. So otherwise, they like to switch on. They like to yeah. talk.
Yeah, I think it's the same for me. I don't I don't ever say you have to have your camera on or it's a requirement, but I just kind of say in the beginning, you're strongly encouraged, if possible, to have your camera on because it kind of helps facilitate interaction a little bit better. But yeah, I don't really bother people if they have it off because I don't need to know.
Interestingly, because some of my classes, some of my students are in class and they are joining via Zoom with other students. So the ones in class wouldn't turn their cameras on, which would be strange. So I would ask them to turn their cameras on because they're only already showing their faces. It would establish better community with students who are online to see who they're talking to. So for those I would require, but otherwise there's no requirement. And like Gwen said, they're encouraged to do so, but if they don't, it's okay, as long as they participate.
I also found that sometimes there are some activities where the camera was not so critical if we were just talking with each other in a group. But then if there was something like I was getting students to write something down and then show it to other students, or do something that involves a kind of show and tell type activity, then that encouraged people to possibly turn on their camera for a specific activity, which seemed to make sense in some cases, but it wouldn't be compulsory either, because they could do it by sending something through chat or something if they couldn't turn on their cameras. I wonder about part of this kind of duty of care kind of aspect as well, was that it's one of the features of Zoom is that for most of us probably we've got it set up so it automatically records everything. So in some cases people would want to share with me about something which was difficult that was going on in their life. So just like in a normal class, it would be better not to do that in the middle of the class, possibly. So I'd have to encourage people to contact me afterwards or before, to have a separate kind of session where I could say, well, now we can talk without being recorded or something like that. So I think there's something odd going on in the way that normally in an Australian class, you wouldn't expect the whole class to be recorded, every single interaction between yourself and the students or with each other. And also occasionally I've had things with students who are calling me and saying, can you please edit out that piece of the class because I said something which might be embarrassing if somebody else heard it out of context or something like that. So there are some, it's an interesting challenge. What happens when we're in this online world where it seems that everything is somehow permanently remembered somewhere by somebody, although we might not know who is actually doing it.
Any other thoughts anyone had about other aspects besides just the camera, other aspects of how much is good, not good to share, but how can we strike a balance between being open and sharing, but also acknowledging privacy and things like gender, just queer spaces that people might not be as, might not want to show their homes, sort of thing. Other things.
It's absolutely right that it's tricky because we're all suddenly in each other's homes, and as Gwen mentioned, we're using, I think Gwen, you were talking about using WhatsApp and all kinds of other social media forms that often some students, these are things that are meant to be separate from their professional life or from university life. Some are quite happy to integrate those things in. They may be having to make social media personas to handle this. So this is it's not a new problem, but being remote seems to make it quite a bit more intense. It seems that everyone here is sort of agreeing that we say if you don't have a camera on, that's fine. If you don't want someone recorded, that's sort of fine. We're working around that, but it's hard to come up with a policy because we're all just working on the fly, it seems.
And it's one thing is that lots of classes, even before this, students would get together and make their own Facebook group or something that went with it. So there seems to be in universities, isn't there, there's this kind of thing where you can have something which is informal and student organized, and that's great. But as soon as the university would get involved, then they would say, oh, well, that will have to be regulated to conform with certain university policies. Sort of. So it's a bit like there's something going on here with etiquette, isn't there? That you go into a classroom on campus, and I don't think people shouldn't eat in the classroom unless it's unless it's to break fast at the end of Ramzan, in which case it's legitimate. Obviously, people should be allowed to eat at that moment. So it's interesting that there are all these kind of class etiquettes on campus, and there are also Zoom etiquettes, which are probably developing organically as we go along through all of this. And I could also mention something else, and maybe I'll bring up another topic, which is for years I was going to language teaching conferences in which people would come along and say, oh, well, we here at our university have developed this wonderful online resource. We've done a series of video interviews of what it's like going shopping in Long Island in Indian shops or something like this, or whatever it was. And then it would turn out that all those things were just available within the learning environment of the university. And everybody always said, oh, we should collaborate more and make our materials available to each other. But now I seem to be hearing that people are finding ways, that Zoom is forcing us to actually make our materials available to a wider space. But how are you feeling? Do you feel there's a tension? Because like everybody's saying we spend a lot of time now creating materials, but do those materials still get trapped inside academic university management systems, or will we be able to, Ian, you're making new materials which the students access. Gwendolyn, you're obviously doing as well. Divya, Sandhya, are these still going to be kind of all locked away from the world, or will there be some way that we can actually are we sharing resources? What kind of resources are you finding that we can share with the wider community? And again, not everybody. Anybody got any comments on this?
My understanding is there are when there are certain things that come up if you load something up to the university official LMS versus doing it through a personal site, that there might be some kind of proprietary issues that I don't fully understand. And then there's the fear that we all have that obviously we already do share resources, but there's that fear that everything's going online, everything's on Zoom. But what if we get all these PowerPoints out and it turns out, well, we don't need language lectures anymore because the PowerPoints are out there. It's not a real fear, but there's a fear that someone in administration will say, just let the PowerPoint teach them Urdu, let the PowerPoint teach them Hindi. And I think that we certainly have that anxiety now, especially given how precarious university positions are right now. So that's, I don't know if that's just me. I see people nodding, so.
Same for us also, like university website is ours. I mean, NUS, as Peter knows, is where we upload the university portal. It's only for our students who are enrolled in that particular module. It's not open for, in fact, for other module students as well. So that that we are not sharing. Definitely, we are not sharing. And if we need, whatever if we need to share it to broader community, I think a lot of copyright and all those things also will come. I mean, like PowerPoint and all that, sometimes we do, because we are using only in class, we do use pictures just from Google. We don't bother that much whether it has copyright issue or does not have. But if we put it on some public portal, we have to be very careful about that thing as well. So at the moment, whatever we are creating is within the university, apart from the books which I have written, because those are books. Otherwise, everything is within the that particular module. So what Zoom is doing, I don't know if that going out. So that part we don't know. And we are not
And-
forced to record the lectures also. So we are not, yeah, for us is up to us if we want to, because language classes, we are not recording and giving to students.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, we can record and we can upload it on the cloud, but if we want, we just turn off the recording. We can do that. Only for language classes, especially because that they should attend. That's the criteria for our university.
Yeah, I know when I was teaching in Wisconsin this past summer, there was a strict university rule actually that you couldn't record anything with students in it. So it's FERPA, right, because of federal regulations there.
Yes,
so,
same. The
we could've,
PDPA here.
I had my own, PowerPoint or whatever, different things that I made for them, videos and things that I shared with them, but we weren't allowed to actually record class. But I think, I think it kind of depends on the way you set up the curriculum development within your institution or within your own classes as well. So the project that we're working on right now at LUMS is actually designed to be a publicly available bank of curricular materials, something like a video, textbook, and different other small things that we're designing to be public available for South Asian languages that are much less commonly taught: Sindhi, Pashto, Panjabi, and then Persian through Urdu. And the instructors are actually all really enthusiastic about having these materials. And it's not going to be all of the materials, but things like video, textbook, etc. So we actually want these things to be available, because you can make the argument as well, right, that it's, it's a branding and institution building and this kind of thing. And because especially for the much less commonly taught languages, there's a lot of passion about having these materials out there for people who don't have, there are very few ways to learn Sindhi if you're not willing to come to South Asia or not able to come to South Asia, right? Or maybe if you live in a big metropolitan area, you could find a tutor, but not many universities teach it, right? And so there's a lot of passion behind that as well. But at the same time, I also think it's important that curricular materials aren't the same as a class. And so I think, I can have the best curricular materials in the world and still be like an awful teacher, so there's a balance somewhere in there between, how much do you share and what do you share and how do you share it? And then also, even if you did share it, I think you can still, I think even if we're using shared materials, right, we make them our own and we do them in our own way. So there's just all kinds of different things to think about in that as well.
Any other thoughts on that topic? Otherwise, Peter, did you have, or any topic anyone wanted to bring up?
I think everybody has said what I had in mind. I would just be echoing what everybody else has said. But I would also say, I think creating materials, a lot of us have been doing it in the past, whether it was creating unique assessments, more specific to our students' needs, or modifying our lessons based on our student group. And that sharing used to be mostly personal. So for instance, if I know another instructor, I would reach out to her and get those materials. So I think we are doing the creation more frequently, but I think the sharing is still limited to those spaces. So I think it would be good to have a pedagogical forum where we could do it more frequently, more systematically. But honestly, until you brought it up, Peter, I don't think I had even considered it. So it's a good idea, something to explore probably, especially as we do more of this now.
Divya, it's funny you say that you never considered that, because you've shared so many wonderful things with me. So I have benefited so much from Divya's expertise over a few years of SASE.
But that's what I'm saying, right? Like that is personal because we're working together, so we do it, but not as a global platform. And I would want to say though, therefore, when I started teaching Hindi in 2011, I had no idea how to approach teaching Hindi in the United States. I had no idea of how to approach Hindi as a second or foreign language. And at that time, I really struggled to look for resources, for guidance on how to do that. So I'm also thinking if there are instructors coming up now, especially for less commonly taught languages, they would benefit from knowing how to approach teaching of, for instance, script online. How do you do that, especially if you have only done it in one format? So I think this is something that we should be talking more seriously about and more systematically about. Just based also on my previous experience.
Yes, and it will benefit new teachers. I mean, whoever joining now as foreign language teachers or second language teachers, because always we have this thing that Hindi, when they start teaching Hindi as a foreign language or second language, they find it that less materials are available commonly. I mean, they don't find that much compared to other foreign languages. So it will be a good idea to start sharing on a common platform. Yeah.
But I think, as Ian said, and all of you have in fact been saying as well, there are all sorts of different issues at different universities. There are questions about should we be sharing things that have students in without their permission or really not? Should we be sharing things that have other people's copyright materials in? Obviously, clearly not. Or how do you set up those structures to allow these kind of sharings to go on? University of Texas flagship for Hindi-Urdu was a great example of a way in which you could set up something. So possibly it might be something going forward where if people start to think this is the kind of thing we want to use, then we need to have projects to actually set up things which have looked at the kind of issues and dealt with them. And also, like for many Hindi courses, I mean, I think I've been pointing people at Rupert Snell's Hindi writing tutor from London University, as it was for years. And then, so that was an interesting example of somebody setting up a useful program, which everybody then accessed. There's been a few problems with the technology of it, maybe going out of date. And then I used to use University of Pennsylvania videos, I believe they were. And then over time, the size of the video seems to get smaller and smaller as the resolutions of screens change, because they were recorded, I don't know what, 320 by 140 pixels or something. So they now appear as tiny videos that you can hardly see in many cases, although they're basically fantastic. So that's the other side to it as well, is that in all of us teaching lesser commonly taught languages like Hindi, we create materials, but it's really difficult to make them available in a way that will be portable for all the ever-changing technological issues that we encounter going forward.
There's two things I'd like to point out from the benefit of us going after the Sanskrit panel. Is that they had a nice 15-20 minute conversation about teaching script, and they pointed out a whole bunch of resources, including kind of an updated version of Rupert Snell's, not his one, but another similar thing, other resources too. But something else that they brought up is, besides just published printed online materials, is us as teachers as a resource, sharing our time with others. You know, it's very different in the Sanskrit world, obviously, like a Vedicist and someone who specializes on Puranas. They might want to like switch class sessions for a day and give their students cross exposure, but I feel like maybe we in the modern language world could do the very same thing. So Ian, you have, you know, this vast knowledge of contemporary and modern literature and literature of Bihar. You know, that would be something very special for another teacher who doesn't specialize on those things. And some other teacher might have some aspect of Hindi for you, or some film knowledge someone might have, or something like this. So we as teachers, we're kind of, you know, we might in a way be limited by institutions, but, you know, we can maybe be that kind of free-flowing resource that, you know, is limited by publication and all that. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I mean, certainly while we're remote, I think a lot of us have been thinking this way, and I've done, I'm not the only one, I think who's done a lot more guest lectures, often little short ones, you know, 20-minute Q&A in a class in the US or somewhere else, and that's been kind of amazing. We now design fantastic syllabi that have scholars and artists from people from all around the world, and say you'll get to speak with them for 20 minutes on this day. That has never, for those of us that haven't been thinking remotely like this, that never seemed like a possibility. So perhaps just the way you described, Chris, that's something we could absolutely do. In the same way we share resources, we could do something along the same lines. I mean, it sounds quite exciting.
Right, absolutely. I think that's the silver lining of this pandemic, which is that now our world has opened, and you could invite somebody without them having to actually travel. So for instance, so using teachers as a resource, using community as a resource during these times. I think one of the challenges has been in the past organizing study abroad programs for languages like Hindi, because students are not that motivated to go to India to study Hindi because it doesn't have a novelty value for them, because a lot of my students are heritage learners and who would visit India fairly frequently. So it has been exciting this year to have them do improvisational theater workshops with somebody from India in my advanced Hindi class. So they get to hear and interact with people and do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So I think Zoom has opened up a whole new world of possibilities.
And I was teaching Urdu to students in the United States, but I was in Pakistan, and so I actually had, although we were on lockdown, so it was a bit more limited, but I was able to go out and just get things that they needed. You know, I could go out and I could go to, once the bookstores opened in June-ish, I could go to a bookstore and get things, you know, and then scan them and send them. And so, or I was able to, you know, I have like a running collection of like street signs and different kind of tokens of handwriting and things that I can add to. But because I was here, I actually like got people to write things down so they could see something written in like authentic handwriting, you know, or I was able to like target for particular signs, and I could also include COVID related things, right? So things that were like very, very relevant to this particular moment, because there's signs about, you know, wash your hands and everything everywhere. So the distance was really a benefit to me in that way, that, you know, I was able to kind of like weirdly virtually bridge that gap, because coming to Pakistan to study is something that is even more challenging for many American students, even not during a pandemic. So that was kind of an amazing benefit there.
Chris, one of the other things that we talked about a bit with the Sanskrit group yesterday, I think it was now, was this issue which we also probably all engaging with, which is how do you reconceptualize assessment in a way that works online? Because all of us are involved in tertiary education, so we are working within different kind of institutions, and they probably have their own ideas about what would be a good way of assessment. But we can see, I mean, certainly here at ANU, for instance, we had an immense controversy about whether, not in our languages, but in some areas, the use of proctorio in attempts to create carefully invigilated online exams, which whether they work or not, I don't know. But the thing was, we couldn't do that sort of thing. So in my case as well, it made me really think this year that assessments needed to be reimagined, because the circumstances that students were working under were so different than normal. They were working under this great stress because they were personally dealing with the issues created by lockdown, or by the COVID situation, or by anxiety created by the fact that they had friends and relatives in places which were greatly impacted by the COVID-19. So it seems to me that this year, more than any other year, we needed to find ways to reimagine assessment so that we were assessing, I don't know, I have this feeling sometimes that when I had an essay marked when I was a student, I much preferred it when that marking was done from what I did rather than looking at how what I'd done related to some abstract criteria. So marking from the work rather than marking from the criteria. But every university is going to have a different set of policies. So how do we deal with this? And we've all been given probably more leeway this year as well, because the universities have been sort of waving their hand and going, well, what do we do under these circumstances? We'll let you all try and work out what's the best that you think you can do. And then probably by the end of next year, they'll be asking us to account for what we've done. But what kind of ways have you found to make the assessment work under the new circumstances? Maybe with some students being on campus and some being online, like Divya is talking about there as well. How do you make sure that the assessment's fair both for the on-campus student and the distance education student? For instance, I often used to have things where I'd talk about what was in the room with people on campus. But then if the person isn't in the room, then how does that work? In fact, one of the problems I remember having in an oral exam was trying to ask people about what was in the room. And then I had somebody saying that I'm sitting under a tree at the moment outside in the park. So the whole premise of your question doesn't make any sense. So guys, have you got any thoughts about how you've interacted with this assessment aspect of things? Ian?
Yeah, we've had to change everything. Definitely, I don't know if it's just my personal preference and just what I see as the needs from the students, but any timed sort of written exam, I don't do that right now with students. If there's any sort of written component, I've designed them so that they're open book and you've got a day to do it. And so that's take a little bit more, it takes longer to create those materials, but it's possible to do. And then I do more, the problem is, all the tools on the LMS and all the multiple choice, and there's all these font issues in that first year class. Intermediate advanced students, they can type in Hindi. First year students, after they learn the script after the first month. So I'll do one-on-one, very sort of quick little oral quizzes along with the written quiz with the students. But it's often just 2 or 3 little questions that I show them and they do a little exercise orally, but it's replication of something we've already done. And then I use those moments as that time to ask that question. I said, how are you doing? It's just a check-in. How do you feel with how things are going? I let them know, here's how you've been doing. Here's the progress I'm seeing. So I'm finding, just using that oral quiz time as a way to just provide that extra support, less than to assess just from my own perspective. But again, we're students in Melbourne are under a huge amount of pressure right now. It's quite difficult for them.
Same for for us, what we have changed few things, like definitely the timed assessment we have, because for this semester we were allowed to tweak the assessment since it was going fully online. So in fact, university encourages us that we should change assessment pattern. So we are not like zooming and asking them to write, because that we don't know if they have 2-3 books open and another laptop is open to copy. So that definitely we are not doing that. And as Ian said, for first year student, the first semester students, it's very difficult for them to type in if they want to type Hindi, because they are barely learning Devanagari script. First we start with speaking and then we move to Devanagari script. So for that, the quizzes, more of a oral quizzes, or when in class, like just talk to them for a while and based on that get some participation percentage, and based on that we just judge where they are, and more of a oral quizzes that we are doing. And all the assessment what we are planning is, I mean, they can do open book. We are not restricting that, because if we restrict also, we don't know, some may follow, some may not follow. So it's better to just, if they want, they can use it. So but definitely, as Ian said, it's very challenging to create, especially for beginners level, where they barely learn much grammar, so it's difficult to create those. So we are as I said earlier, more audio files. They're also creating more audio files instead of just writing. So of course they must be preparing in transliteration, and then they are recording and all but that also making them learn something. They are doing something, they are maybe finding from somewhere, or they are translating from somewhere, so that's okay. So those kind of thing, or some, as I said, some oral quizzes, definitely we have changed that. And for higher group essays and all that, we are still keeping it where they can modify, they can work together, and we can monitor. So that those things we are still keeping it. Some group projects still we are keeping it when, I mean, through online they are meeting and they are discussing, and then they are creating some audio, video projects. In fact, some PowerPoint video projects and all those things also they are doing. And they are finding it quite nice. And in fact, like creating, still is week 5, so they have not done much. Now in recess week, they will be doing some project, which I will see in week 7. And but the kind of questions which they were asking, I can guess that they are working on that, and they are interested doing different kind of things.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think also, you know, I'm completely agree with what everyone else has said about the things being open book and not being timed and taking off some of that pressure. It's just not really doable to have like a timed closed booked quiz, and it's not of that great of a benefit anyway. Like I don't think we're missing a lot, but I think one of the big challenges there for me has been convincing students that whatever level they're at is fine, and that I'm not out to punish them for getting a wrong answer by cutting their marks. Because, you know, so like I have to have that discussion multiple times, you know, through, even though at the beginning I set it up and I say, look, if you're trying your best, you will get a good grade, period. If you're doing things, if you turn things in on time and kind of just basically are putting in the minimum effort, I'm not going to be mad if you forgot the word for Tuesday or something. I'm not going to cut your marks. You're not going to fail, whatever. But even I find that I still have to kind of remind certain students in particular, you know, so I had a student, we had just barely learned past habitual karta tha, you know, and she turned in an essay. They had to write something about their childhood. So that's one of the other things, right, is we try to give like personalized assessments. So, you know, they can connect it with themselves, and it's individual and it's creative and this kind of thing, you know, and she turned something in with a, you know, a perfective compound verb, kar diya tha or something, you know, like, so, you know, she has gone to Google Translate, like there's no way. And this student in particular, this, you know, was kind of a struggling student. And I was sure that she couldn't have come up with it on her own, you know, and so that's another kind of extra thing I feel like we have to keep our eye on with these kinds of assessments, is getting them out of that old assessment mode. And when this kind of thing happens, you have to meet with that student and say, look, you know, I know this isn't your work. I know you have gotten help. And, you know, I'm not trying to punish you for that, but like, let's talk about why you felt like that was so necessary, you know, and it goes back to that idea of empathy too, that, you know, we have to kind of like, I did not get into this profession to be anybody's therapist, but like you do to a certain extent, you have to do a little bit of work to say, okay, you know, why do you feel like so much stress that you feel the need to go to Google Translate and cheat on your Urdu exam? Is it because you're having issues with time management? Is it because you're having anxiety about grades? Is it because there's other stuff going on at home? You know, but like, let's address that issue. You know, it's, you don't feel like in the future you have to, you know, use Google, which is not ultimately helping you learn anyway.
Right. I would absolutely support what Gwen said, and I add, I reinforce multiple times in my classes that these assessments are designed to ensure your success. I'm not here to catch you. So what I've also found that has worked, even in regular exams, that I continue to do is include extra credit questions in the homework, in the quiz, because I think there's generally a lot of exam anxiety or test taking anxiety in students. So by giving those opportunities within the exam, I'm also translating that message. When I say this is designed for your success, well, this is how I'm doing it for you, so that it's not just words sometimes, because students at the end of the day, they also, the grade matters, especially in institutions where a lot of students are used to getting an A, are targeting A, that has been their goal. It is very important. Even 1 point less could really stress them out. So I want to create those opportunities. And another thing that has worked in my advanced Hindi, I've not tried that in my elementary Hindi, which is choose your own adventure activities, especially to allow for tech difficulties that somebody might encounter, and also to allow for differentiated instruction, which is because you have your students who might be at different proficiency, especially at intermediate and advanced. So students could, for the same topic, maybe watch a video and write a response. They could read something and write a response. They could interact with, they could interview something and write a response. So just also offering those opportunities that takes into account their situations has also been really useful.
And Chris was talking about student presentations this year as well as an interesting aspect of this. Would you like to?
Sure. We had some fun since our students were in different places this time, that when we were doing kind of like Dishain and Baindain, Muro, etc. We had each student do kind of a guided tour of their town that they were in. So they kind of used a map and photos and a PowerPoint. They would kind of guide us on a tour. They would show a picture of the street and then ask the students, do we turn left? Do we turn right? Where are we going? What do you see? So it was more interesting and more engaging, and the students kind of used it over several lessons instead of, me showing a map of Canberra or Delhi and everyone said, okay, the Jama Masjid is in Old Delhi. It's that far to the old fort. And then everyone has the same response kind of thing. So it's trying to use the fact that they're in all these random places, mostly in very rural towns in Australia. So it can get quite interesting. But yeah, so things like that I found useful.
And I found I was teaching a third-year class and we were doing some stories like that of Gangaji and Shantanu from the Mahabharata. And then the students were writing assignments about how would they feel if they were Gangaji involved in the story. And it was very kind of a good activity because people changed what they were doing. Partly to reflect their own ability levels, but also to reflect how they'd engaged with the materials. I also had people who've been reading a description of Ayodhya in the Ramayana in the first semester. And then I asked people to try and describe their hometown, where they actually are using similar kind of language. And got an account of Sydney as a wondrous, lustrous city, like Ayodhya in Ramcharitmanas. So I think it's interesting that this semester as well, probably over this year, because students are so concerned about their home life, the home world also, that there are great opportunities for that kind of engagement with the originality, the thing, Gwendolyn, that you mentioned as well. It's very personal, the assessment items, because it relates to people's childhood and lives. Yeah, it's a real challenge though, this business about when people use grammar forms, which are obviously impossible for them to learn as part of your course, but that's been with us for a long time, I think, as well. I had a long period back when I was doing distance education, when Google Translate was first coming online, and I found that I was endlessly correcting people saying "मैं चले गया," हम लोग वहाँ चले गए, and I was saying, why are you saying that? And then I realized eventually that it was Google Translate was translating I went as "हम चले गए," or something like that. So I was constantly correcting Google Translate or something like that. So I think I try and incorporate into classes some discussions about the eccentricities of Google Translate. वहाँ पर एक गाय था. Why is this not possible? Obviously, if you think about it for a moment. So it's been very interesting to try and do that, to try and interact with this assessment aspect. But I don't think it's actually that different in a way for all of us teaching Hindi either, because we have this kind of mixed cohorts of students with heritage students and students who know parallel South Asian languages versus zero start students, as they're sometimes called as well. So I think possibly Hindi instruction has had this as a question for a long time, but maybe it's made it more sort of germane to try and make it. Mm.
I'd like to pick up on that actually a little bit, Peter, and for everyone else. Something that we have all dealt with is all the kind of varied instruction levels in, you know, every language. Intermediate levels also quite varied, but for all of us, even first year, it can be quite challenging, since we'll have a student that is pretty, you know, a heritage student or a near heritage student, but doesn't know how to write. So they're kind of thrown in the awkward situation of being in a first year and all these things. Something that came up in all of our individual interviews is also thinking about the plurality of Hindi, like Meri Dadi ne aisa kaha or something. She said something this way and it's not right. Or in assessments, my students might, I might ask them to translate something from English to Hindi, and I know that they have asked their South Asian partner, because they're like, what's the past perfective? Who cares? Let's do it this other way because it sounds better. I'm curious how we have maybe used the changed classroom of this year to think about differently these sorts of things. Think either variations in level because of heritage students, or pluralities and types of Hindi, or people hearing Hindi from very different sources and you are having to say, well, okay, yes, maybe, but I have to teach this sort of standardized Hindi. Any thoughts anyone's had over the past year of their experience in that realm?
Great. It just reminded me of a student I had years ago in an events class who reading some literature, reading some Phoenician Renu, reading some Premchand, and she was doing it was clear she was going over some of this with her parents, so that came up, but also her mother's thoughts on the literature were very much, her mother was helping her write some of the things, sort of figured that out at some point, but the picture I was getting suddenly that this student's mother hadn't read Hindi literature before, and it was this whole new sort of world, and it was quite exciting for the parent. And rather than sort of punish the student for having a parent who wants to do all this homework, I finally sort of changed the assignment toward the end that you know, interview your mother about this, and get the thoughts on it, and what your mother liked about it, and that worked out quite well. But it was once I figured out what was going on there. But the other point about, well, my grandmother speaks this way, or you know, but I've heard it like this. My partner speaks that way. I always say, it's just in my own mind. I think it's important to defer to those authorities, and as authorities. And I say that, of course, there's a wide variety of language, and that we should celebrate those. But that it does come up. It does come up quite a bit.
So one of the things that I emphasize in my classes is conversational. So we talk about conversation sequences. Gwen and I have talked about that a little bit in Sassly. So we were doing opening conversations this past couple of weeks, and we were just looking at how you open conversations in Hindi. And there's no one way to do it. Not everybody begins a conversation with namaste or namaskar or salam alaikum. There are so many variations, there are individual variations, there are regional, age, so many gender, so many factors come in. So I have them start with English and teach me as a non-native speaker how I should open conversations. And when they get into debate about, well, this is how I say it, I've never had this person, I've never had somebody say this to me, it depends on the context. I take those moments and I frame the entire discussion on opening conversations within that context. So we say in the very beginning, this phrase, it depends, is going to be used a lot of times when we're talking about conversation, because that's just the nature of conversations. And we also talk about certain attitudes that we want to have when we approach learning Hindi and talking about conversation, which is we want to critically approach it and not just take it as a given. So for instance, whose language are we talking about? Is it my language? Is it mine within my urban household in Delhi, which is Panjabi? Or whose language are we talking about? Is it Northern India? Is it urban Northern India? Is it the educated urban Northern India? So whose language are we talking about? Who and how do we approach when we find something that's different from our experience? How do I respond to it when I find something that is not what we discussed in the class? So we spent quite some time discussing these things, because this becomes part of language learning throughout, even when they stop coming to class and they approach language outside the class. So we dwell a little on that and have that discussion, and even have reflection tasks that follow up on those discussions, so students have time to process and consolidate what we've discussed in class. And it's interesting that a lot of times students would then go back to these conversations and bring them up again in later reflections I've seen in the past. So I found that immensely useful, just to talk about plurality in that context.
It's really fantastic. I kind of wish I had used that example here in Australia, because I've had to relearn English in a certain way coming from the US. So, relearning that "how are you doing" is now "how you going?" And I answered the first time by bus, and no one really got that. So it's true. English is equally as plural and as diverse. So I wish I had brought that up.
And it's also very true as well that as somebody who's been teaching for a while now, I've noticed that things which made sense to teach in one way at one point, they no longer make sense in some ways. I think I remember Torihi Esekarunga. I would teach that maybe in English, could be I would scarcely do it. And then I've discovered that nowadays nobody amongst my students knows what that means in English. I would scarcely do it. So I have to explain Torihi Esekarunga. And then eventually I get an explanation. So sometimes the English language forms also clearly become redundant over time. On the other hand, though, I still end up having to teach people about things like your watchman, fast or slow, or age piche. It might not be useful at the moment, but it would be useful if you were reading a story set in the past where it was relevant to have such usages. Because that's the other thing, of course, happens, I think, with this language variation is students will say, why should I learn kalam? Everybody says pen. But then the trouble is that means that they're then not able to access the literature. We had a student come reading, maybe it was a Premchand story. I remember something was Soup Lekar Kamre Mein Aaye, and the person translated it as being, well, of course, somebody came into the room carrying some soup, but it didn't make sense because it was not that sort of soup. So it's also interesting, in fact, that this works across even somebody from South Asian background. If they now think of bringing in puja ingredients on a tray or something, rather than in traditional soup. So it becomes a kind of multi-generational issue as well, doesn't it? And I had troubles in Singapore when I was there. Sandhya was trying to teach people that half past is the same as sare teen or something like that. But then there's Chinese students in the class didn't know what half past meant because they said it was 3:30, of course, in that case. There was no half past in the English spoken there. So it's definitely going to be a great way of doing it. I agree with you, to show students that things are really varying in English as well. But there's no standard one thing going to the other. But it's the other thing that is quite interesting this year, and I wonder if any of you, how do you feel about it? I've had a number of students who wanted in the advanced year classes to say, well, why shouldn't we all as women use masculine plural when speaking about ourselves? And then you think, oh, how are we going to incorporate that into the class? My first response normally is it has to be a conscious decision. You need to explain why you're now using something which is regarded as not correct or something in many Hindi grammar books, but it's definitely a speech pattern, so it is perfectly correct to say it. But you've got to give a context in which it's taking place. So do you come across issues where students want to change the way that they speak to reflect their own particular realities? It's often to do with gender and possibly age as well. Ah, okay, say home, that kind of thing. It's fine, it's all really young, isn't it? But maybe not if you're older. What do you think, Sandhya, in Singapore at the moment? Do people say "aap kaise ho"?
Yeah, people do say "aap kaise ho," but the thing, as you know, we don't take heritage learners. So we have
Yes.
only Hindi as a foreign language learner. So we don't get this. They might have, the Tamil students especially, if they might have little bit of Bollywood songs knowledge, or maybe they know khana or pani or those 1, 2 words they have picked up from friends, but not phrases. So we don't get this kind of problem. But yes, when we give some task like they have to create a dialogue or something, they did came up with this "aap kaise ho," because one of my student, he was in hostel, and he had a friend from Pakistan, and he had a friend from India. So he was learning Hindi from both of them. So he was using more of a, like they were his homework tutor. And that like hum, a lot of uses of hum, and then aap kaise ho, because his Indian friend was from Delhi, and Delhi is quite common to say aap kaise ho. So he was arguing, no, my friends know their Hindi is really good, and I said, okay, we will talk to them also one day. That's not that. Then of course, I mean, he understood the thing, but he was quite confused that if it's wrong, why they are using it. And then we had to go into discussion of the uses of tum and ho, and the Panjabi prabhav and all those things. I mean, I had to explain all those things, even the hum. Like in Pakistan also, some, I think certain people, they do use hum instead of main. No, they don't. Okay, so maybe his Delhi friend must have taught that. And in Lucknow, a lot of people use hum. So that definitely, I mean, we had to open up discussion, and we had to talk about why is, yes, certain area they use it and they don't find it wrong. And it's not wrong when you talk to native. I mean, they will speak that way. But when we are learning, we can't teach you aap kaise ho. We have to teach you aap kaise hain or tum kaise ho. And we will practice that. But I do explain this aap kaise ho in class after that incident. I do tell them that you will hear this many times among your friends, and that's the reason why they are using it. Of course, if you want later, you can use it, but that's not the correct grammar. Yeah.
Yeah, I find a similar. I mean, some people. I don't want to make a full blanket statement about कि Pakistan में कोई ऐसा नहीं कहता. I think if you heard it, it might be like older ladies who had migrated from, you know, Lucknow, this region, now live in Karachi. But it's very much like you would not hear that in a typical like Lahori or Panjabi Urdu. And Punjabi has so over dominated Urdu here that even most of the time in informal speech and like dramas and things, you'll hear, I mean, aap kaise ho is very common, but even more common is the maine jana phenomenon.
मैंने करना है, मैंने जाना है, that
that,
yes.
उन्होंने करना है. Also like ne as kind of a blanket like co-replacement is really common. And in Urdu classes, because we do get the heritage learners who have heard that construction at home, you know, I make a point to say this is a very much like Punjab influence thing, and you'll hear this in Punjab, but if you say it in Karachi, you know, you'll get made fun of. But if you say it in Lahore, you're fine. If you say it in Delhi, you'll get made fun of. Well, or maybe if you say it in Lucknow, let's say, you'll get made fun of. Maybe in Delhi it would work, I don't know. But I think that's really important, right, to make sure to, and the same thing with words, genders of words, because they also vary, you know, these kind of things, and making sure that, you know, telling students, I won't necessarily like cut your marks if you say that dahi is feminine, but know that that's like a very Punjabi thing, and so, you know, it's fine. But if you're in Lucknow, you might get called out for it by some very snobby person. But honestly, I mean, I also think that we need to contextualize as well for our students that, like, I actually, especially with gender, I actually try to like downplay for them. Like, you do need to know the gender, you know, you're expected to learn it, but like, I also don't want them to be so afraid that like, I'm not going to remember the gender of the word, that then they won't speak. So you also have to kind of reassure them that even if you get it wrong in the store, you know, when you're in India, like, you will survive, and that person will still understand. You know, most likely you're not going to like commit some horrible social blunder. But I think Peter's question about gender, I mean, I think many of us have probably had people in our classes who are gender non-conforming. And for those students, like, usually I mean, I would never approach somebody and say, hey, do you want to have a conversation about your pronouns? But if a student has requested me, for example, to use they as a pronoun, right? Then, then I might say, there are other options for people, just generally to the class, not singling anyone out. I might just say there are other options, if somebody wants to talk about, pronouns that they can use in class. And I've had students choose to use, I've had genderqueer students go with that masculine plural option because that kind of exists in some registers or some dialects, right? So I think it's important to also like bring that out. It's rare, but it happens pretty regularly. Actually, it's not that rare anymore. I think most of us will have had a student.
And even in videos, if we pick up some videos, I mean, from TV dramas, recent dramas and all that, they do use "aap kaise ho" or "aap kahan ja rahe ho," those kind of sentence. So it's that's why after that, like, I made a point that I will discuss this in class. That okay, this is a very common thing, and if you use it, it's not that anybody going to punish you. Definitely, if your friend use, you can use it, but that's not the right. I mean, as a proper Hindi, but definitely you can use it. So if they say "aap kaise ho," is fine. I mean, we keep the conversation on. Maybe later we can discuss again and we can talk about it. So that.
And do you think as well that there's a degree to which by the time people start reading literature and then discover that Premchand virtually never ever wrote they anywhere, always had both, for both singular and plural, that people realize that many of the fine structures of some of the grammar books might be more imaginary than real. I think I came across once an 1890s Hindi instruction book by Pincott, which says that many people are incorrectly saying "Khana bahut swad hai," and it should be "swadisht." And I was thinking, well, it's just that the grammarians were saying it should be "swadisht," because everybody then and now is still saying "swad" in them. But again, we then will find somebody whose grandmother has told them, no, you must say "swadisht," or grandfather has told them, and they say, oh, let's say "laziz" instead in that case. So that might be another aspect of things, which is how we're all teaching in very different contexts. And this issue about how we adapt our Hindi-Urdu sort of parallel vocabularies is one that might be impacted upon by having more diverse classes because of the online environment, or is it just happening anyway? So I normally try and think that with these kind of things, I want to teach people at least one form that they're comfortable with, so they'll be able to automatically produce something. But I want people to be aware of the fact that Swadisht, Laziz, tasty will all be heard according to who you're speaking with at any one time. And there's no way that you could say that one is right or wrong. They're just different contexts in which words are used. So that's something which is a bit of a challenge at times. But is that helped by the online environment? Does it make any difference? I'm not sure. I think it could be something quite separate from the online environment. That's just part of the language teaching.
There's one way in which, I mean, Divya is kind of modeling it now. She's used her English pronouns in her name below the screen, but I have also had students say, change it to be like name plus, I usually just make them pick some very plain verb. So, main karta hu, main karti hu, next to their name. So that when I break them off into, I mean, it's a small enough class, most students know each other anyway, but at the beginning, when I split them off into breakout rooms, they then know how to address someone without having to have the conversation. Because I feel like students are okay with having that conversation with me most of the time, but maybe not with each other. They don't know each other that well yet.
Mm.
So, you know, it's easy in English. You just put she, her, he, him. But in
Mm.
Hindi, I kind of make it more subtle. Main karti hu, main karta hu.
Mm. Mm.
Or karte hain, hum karte hain. What do you know? Whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, we can use just adjectives, मैं लंबी हूँ, मैं लंबा हूँ,
Yeah.
kind of thing to make it, yeah.
Yeah. And another aspect of the online class, which is probably we have similarly on campus, which is kind of an issue which I wondered. Divya, you were mentioning this when we were talking on the previous interview as well, which was the kind of gestural language that people are using, whether it's kind of language specific and this kind of business. So are you noticing that students in your groups, when they're working online, are developing a tendency of pointing like that rather than rudely using their finger or whatever it would be? Do you see ways in which people are picking up, because we had this, I was thinking about this earlier on, I was thinking, well, actually, are these Hindi language gestures or Urdu language gestures? Or would Sanskrit also have the same gestures? Are there distinctive kind of non-verbal communication features of the way that we react to each other and sort of ask each other to go on and speak and things like that? But is it different? Does being online make that somehow come to the fore in new ways? Anybody?
I've used a few things more. Like I don't introduce like calling someone this way or this way.
Mm.
I don't usually think about introducing that really because it's just something you figure out when you go to South Asia.
Mm. Mm.
But now I have to be like aye or whatever it is. I have to think about it a bit more. And now the students are starting to pick which one they're doing.
Mm.
I think one thing that, and this kind of ties back to the previous discussion on dialects and language, is one kind of gestural thing that is kind of fun, or not fun, it's an interesting like lesson to give students because it gives you a window to discuss that sociolinguistic background, and especially like the stereotypes around Urdu is that, every Urdu textbook that I've ever had, and they say, commonly people greet each other by doing this hand to the forehead gesture thing, and that's like in the textbook, if this is Urdu, like adab, right? Nobody does that. Sorry, like nobody, I mean, people at a mushaira maybe do that, but this is such a like stereotype, right, of the Urdu from 1950s Bollywood films or something. So I think like gestures can be a great way to open that window to discussing like, okay, your book says this, but as a person living in Pakistan, I can tell you that people do not do this on the reg, and so there might be other things that they do. Waving is really common. Just kind of bowing your head is common, or like I could teach them the classic like South Asian dude hug, or like the sort of that hug that dudes do, the half handshake, half hug thing. That's more common, and so it gives a nice advantage point. But in terms of teaching it online, I find that the spatial things have been really difficult teaching online, and not just gesture, but also maps and directions and things. I took that such for granted teaching post positions that like I had a little dance that I would do, aage piche, this thing does not translate to a Zoom screen. So like even beyond the greetings and things, I would be curious to see how other people are negotiating even kind of simple things like that. When we teach those things in the classroom, we always have the same references, and like Peter pointed this out earlier, people might not even be in a room. But even if we're all in a different room, if I say, darwaza wahan hai, or, darwaze ke paas khidki hai, or whatever, like, I don't know if it's true in your room. I don't know if what you can see the like flipped image of my Zoom screen or what. So it's really difficult. I don't know how other people, I have not figured out a good way to do this yet in an interactive like Zoom setting, and I don't know what other people do. I would love to hear more.
certainly sympathise, because I can normally not tell the difference between right and left anyway under normal life, but when I'm on Zoom session, it's going to be even worse. There's almost minimal chance for those things actually being in the right direction. So, but it is interesting. It's just like the way that if we're talking in Hindi and then we're going yeah in the middle of it, it sounds odd because it's not, shouldn't be there unless it's part of a new cool feature of Hindi that we're going to start saying yeah. And so similarly, if I start going sort of like that in Hindi, it's not going to make sense. So it is interesting that the gestural language of the distance that we maintain from each other in the classroom, the personal space and how we do or don't go into it and things like that. There are definitely some things which are a challenge in Hindi. How lagi is difficult to demonstrate on the Zoom screen unless we're in a different context where we're not just sitting but actually acting in the classroom. So there's interesting challenges there, but I think there probably are challenges anyway. So earlier on, Chris and I were saying that maybe what we should do as well was have some time to look at the questions that people have been posting. And
I thought that I could pitch some of the written. First, I'd like to say to all the attendees who are viewing, please send in your written questions in the Q&A box, since we'll go to the Q&A now. But also you can raise your digital hand in the participants panel, and I can give you temporary permission to speak with your audio. So we'll get to you, just raise your hand or send in a typed response. And because not everyone will be able to see the screen, I thought I might read it out for everyone, and then you can give us your thoughts. So we have a couple of things from Rebecca Manring, who's, hi Rebecca, at the University of Indiana. So the first thing she said is along the lines of what Gwen described before, so this is at the beginning of our talk, the AIIS, which is the American Institute of Indian Studies, has been able to manage the monolingual guest component of their language programs by sending a staff person with a video recorder or even just a laptop to local NGOs or the chai stall or shops to talk with local people and allow for students to interact with them. Our Panjabi program is still having the regular Bhangra lessons and yoga classes too. So you might have to be more creative, but maybe the end result is more gratifying. So that sounds really wonderful, Rebecca. Any other creative things any of you have tried on that front, trying to involve either like if you're in North America or Australia or Singapore, the diaspora Indian community, or Gwen, have you gone to harass anyone in the Lahore bazaars with a camera for your American students?
I thought about it, but the lockdown was kind of a kind of a bummer. But I mean, I did some of those things that I mentioned, and I also I roped in people to do like recorded spoken passages and different kinds of things. And I think regular guest speakers is something that we're trying to implement moving forward, because our teachers are also not all here. Like I think our Pashto teacher is in KP right now. Our Sindhi teacher is here, but because we're not in the university and people don't have to come to the university to participate, I know that several of the teachers that I'm working with, our Persian teacher, for example, because we're online already, she has all of these amazing friends and colleagues in Iran that she can use as a course. So yeah, I think this is one thing that is such a huge opportunity, and I think we can all kind of incorporate it. But I wish we could do Bhangra lessons. I have to talk to our Panjabi teacher. So that
we have planned, we haven't done it yet, for the imperatives. We are going to have students who are at homes, their family members lead cooking demos. So I think this is an opportunity when we can finally make something, because when you're on campus, you don't have access to a kitchen, but now you do. So we have that planned. So let's see how that turns out.
Still can't eat anything though.
Yeah, I mean, in week 3, we had like yaha, waha, then kya hai, and all those things when imperative, I mean, interrogatives when we were doing. Students gave this idea. Initially I didn't say, because I mean, nobody, maybe they are hesitant to show their house or something, but some of the students say, if whoever is comfortable, we will show the room, our room, what we have and where the placing and all that. So they took up. So these kind of things are coming up, which is not possible in face-to-face classes. And as I mentioned earlier also, one of my students has cat. So her cat always just jump over when we are teaching, and it's very exciting for the whole class. So these kind of things, and of course this bhangra and all that we are not doing, but learning a lot of grammar we do using Zoom. We use music and we do stand up, but that, like, I inform them advance, so if they don't want to wear shorts, they want to wear long pants, they can wear, because sometime at home whatever we are wearing. So that I mean, it's not compulsory they have to get up and do, but that's a choice and they enjoy. So they prefer, they in fact ask when we are going to have the next activity. So those kind of things we are doing, and let's see how few more weeks we will come up with new ideas. And yeah, and students are, since it's a lockdown, and opportunities that we can connect with anybody. So students of intermediate modules, they have said that we would love to talk to native people in India, and I have arranged few which we have not spoken yet. So that those kind of things, they are also coming up and asking us to do. Yeah.
I've had a similar, haven't got this set up yet, but working with a university elsewhere in Korea, actually, we're trying to set up Hindi students there with Hindi students here at La Trobe. And the idea is that just to create a very small, over a period of, they'll meet 2 or 3 times over Zoom and do a sort of 5-minute presentation on, this is my friend, here's what I've learned about them, here's their name, just simple things like that, that wouldn't be something I would normally have thought of trying to make happen if we weren't in this scenario we're in.
So, and then Rebecca also mentions that they're putting together a resource bank for AIIS with various languages. And it sounds like AIIS and LUM should speak. We could all be very helpful to one another. I think we could all agree with that. So we have several things posted by Sai Bhaktawardekar. Some really useful links that I would encourage everyone to go see, but I also see that their hand is also raised, so I'll see if I can. There you go. Hi, Sai. Feel free to ask there any question or any comments you'd like to give.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. So my name is Sai Bhattawardekar, and I'm actually an associate professor of Hindi and Urdu at University of Hawaii. And it's nice to see Divya, and hello, Peter, after 7 years.
Yes.
Hi, Sai.
Hi. And I just wanted to, first of all, appreciate that this is important, that South Asian languages are represented on these fora. And I wanted to make you guys, or offer you the resources that I have created at University of Hawaii, including a number of video project-based assignments or projects that I created, which incorporated not just creativity, but a care, a sense of care that came from wanting to thrive in these difficult situations. So the first project I did was a lyrical film project that was in elementary Hindi, actually. And we all wrote very simple and actually profound poems, as it turned out, on the prompt, "Who am I?" And one mathematics major student in my class wrote this poem about trying to equate himself with mathematical equations. So he conceived himself as profound and as simple as mathematical equations. And he wrote an amazing poem and created an amazing short film in the isolation of his home. So he didn't have to go anywhere. He just used his cell phone and some editing software that all of us have access to, and created this lyrical short film, which I have shared with you. I hope you got it.
Yeah, everyone should be able to see it in the Q&A or the chat box.
And the second project I did was actually an interview with a Japanese student of Hindi who had to leave Hawaii and go to Japan in the middle of the semester, and what her situation was and what she had to go through and what the effect of COVID was on international students. So that was an interview project. And the third one was an advanced Hindi project, actually an interview with a very well-known choreographer, world-renowned choreographer in India, and his dancers, and how they are doing dance performances, rethinking the idea of space in the COVID situation. So I've given links to all three in chat and in Q&A, and I just wanted to, first of all, share this in the spirit of sharing. So what we were talking about before, where either institutional requirements or just this sense of not knowing how to share on common platforms what we do. And I want to break through that and kind of give you guys the stuff that I've done on YouTube and easily accessible elsewhere, but also want to encourage this international collaboration on things like this, where we can not only create and share, but create a platform where we can share the project plan itself, where we can actually, because a lot of times creative projects, when we do them in our classes, they're like magic. You know, sometimes you have to allow madness to your method to have these projects emerge. And only retrospectively you realize, oh, these are the steps that I actually ended up taking. And this is how it resulted into this product. And these were the stumbling blocks on the way, and so on. And I think if we create a platform, international platform, in which these projects with their project blueprints and supplemental material and reflections are shared, we can actually create these projects in our classrooms, regardless of who originated them. And I would like to encourage and actually even take part and maybe become part of a think tank or something where we can accomplish this.
I think that would be, sorry.
Take that to a higher level. Sorry, I talked too much.
No, that's all right. I think that would be a wonderful idea. I know that was the first thing that came out of the Sanskrit group that met yesterday. They're already putting together like Google Docs and plans for websites and things. I think we can very much do the same and even maybe link up with them, so we can make like a South Asian language share a platform to share things like this. So I think that's a wonderful idea. I'll keep going into the next questions, but in the meantime, I'll type Peter and my email addresses in the chat. So if anyone that's viewing would like to be involved in those sorts of things, please send us an email, and then we can like collect everyone's email addresses and start like a listserv or something like that. So I'll put that there while we chat. But we had some other things that came in. Justina Wisniewska Singh from Poland was asking about a typing Hindi script resource, and she mentioned the hindibhasha.com one. I also shared, I'll share in the chat as well, the other one that's geared towards Sanskrit, but obviously with a teacher, you can modify that for your Hindi classroom. I have typed it in the chat, so that one's very useful. And we have another question from Alka Gupta, who asked, how long usually are classes online? So I guess this means like one session of a class, but if that's not correct, please Alka correct me. But yes, so anyone, how they're handling that sort of thing.
Well, I can kick off here and say thank you, Alka, for your question. That's and it's here at the university, the Hindi classes, we have 2 90-minute sessions a week. So, and we normally have, they vary the student number. We don't normally get classes of more than about 15 people. And if we have more than 16 people studying at once, then we think of breaking it into 2 classes, which would mean more work for us, but it means that the students can interact better with each other. Some of the other languages here, they're trying to work with larger class sizes. but it's not a very effective method online, because as Divya was saying, it's really slow to deal with material when you get a lot of people in a class. So it's very interesting, isn't it, that how 3 hours, that's a sort of median position. Some of our languages here at ANU online, they go for as little as 90 minutes a week in some cases. Some have 2 hours, some have 3 hours. But I'm interested to hear now about what your situations are.
Yep, our classes are, the first year class meets 2 hours twice a week for 2-hour sessions, and then my other classes they're intermediate and advanced are scheduled for 3-hour blocks once a week, which is quite tiring on Zoom. So I break it up into 50-minute chunks, and we do 3 different things and have little coffee breaks or walk breaks, and it seems to work out all right.
I know that SASLI, because it's an intensive program, usually we have 4 hours of class a day, and that's just, you know, I think we would all die from 4 hours of Zoom in a row. So which I was really nervous about this initially, but they actually cut the synchronous time in half. And even in an intensive program, I was very skeptical. But what that did is pushed us really into the flip design zone. And although, again, like as I said in the beginning, initially it was a lot of work for us, kind of front loading all of the things and preparing many things for them to do asynchronously, using all 4 skills and everything. I was shocked that their OPI scores were comparable with previous years, even giving the reduced instruction. So I think you can reduce the instruction time, but you have to really then put in all of the effort to make it like a fully flipped, you know, blended class. So it's, you know, there's like that trade-off. Here during the academic year, we usually do 2 hours or hour and 50 minutes twice a week. And I've told the teachers they could go down to like, you know, an hour and 15 or an hour and a half, and it's fine. We don't have to like keep them on the Zoom for the full 2 hours. And our department has been really supportive of reducing class size, but we've also like, as a program, as a language program, I think almost all of the teachers have been spending a lot of time developing blended materials in the same kind of way, just to avoid any lecturing in class. And so like just minimize it as much as possible, the lecture, so that whatever time is spent like really interactively.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Here we have, we do twice a week, and actually it's said 2 hours per class, but it's only 1 hour 35 minutes because the students get time to go prepare for the next class. So this was university rule from previously, I mean, even face to face, and we are following the same. So in that 1 hour 35 minute in between, we take 2-minute break, just to stand up or have water or something, not like full 1.5 hours sitting down at one place. So that we do, and that works so far. Yeah, of course the preparation and all those things keep going on.
Right.
Divya.
So my first year courses are 5 credit. So we meet 4 days a week. 2 days we meet for 50 minutes, and 2 days we meet for 75 minutes. It was not required, but I made one of these sessions asynchronous, and that has made me really intentional about using class time, about what is it that we want to do during class, so that especially students who are online, who are going to be facing screens for also the rest of their courses, how do they participate? And that has been working really well. Again, it's a lot of preparation, a lot of planning ahead, but it has been working well, I think.
And I would like to just add before the next question comes up, which is that I think one of the things that would be really good to do going ahead is maybe have sessions a bit like this, but more like a regular seminar thing that takes place, where people could talk about the kind of issues that they're finding coming up and the innovative ways that they're dealing with them. And then also that can also be, as Chris was saying, something which could become a kind of a connection site where we could share ideas with each other as well. Because it sounds like it should be a straightforward question: how many hours do you teach a week? But then it turns out the question has all these sort of complications. It's 2 hours, but it's 1 hour 35, or it's 2 hours, but it means something different. And then all of us are saying that so much as it's becoming a flipped class environment. So the time is a really something that we need to think about. Chris, up to you. By the way, time, I should warn you, we will get cut off in 5 minutes. So the university system is pretty flexible on this one, apparently.
Actually, now that I'm the one that signed on and not our administration staff, I can end it when we want to. But we should still be
fantastic.
We should still be mindful of the time.
Yeah.
So we have 5 minutes left. I would encourage anyone to raise their hand in the participants panel if they'd like to ask a question out loud, or type a question into the question and answer box if they want to ask it that way. Otherwise, in the meantime, could I turn it over to Divya, Sandhya, Gwendolyn, and Ian? Anything that came up for you while you were viewing each other's interviews that you thought you might want to pick a little bit at and learn more about?
I was just fascinated to hear about the different types of students that we all have in our classrooms, especially when I was listening, Gwen, to you speak about the Urdu students that you have, why they're studying Urdu and what they expect to get out of the class, and how different it is in the situation you have teaching the language, which is not at all comparable, but slightly overlaps with heritage students we have in Australia or in the US. And it definitely got me just thinking about all these different kinds of students that we encounter, and how, speaking from my own perspective, how different their language journeys are to my own. I found that fascinating.
I also found that Gwen, I mean, I'm sure you can respond on about your own situation, but I found that your mix of experience teaching from Pakistan to the US, but also in Pakistan to students who are, you're not teaching, well, your group of teachers that you work with aren't necessarily teaching the students that we would think of as being the people going to do a degree in Urdu or Hindi in South Asia, but come from sort of a similar place to some of our heritage students, like Ian was saying.
Yeah, it was a really interesting shift from teaching in a typical, in the Anglophone world, we get, we have a kind of typical idea of what a heritage student is, and here it's really different. I taught one course which was geared toward essentially students who had grown up in Pakistan but could not speak Urdu very well, or they could perhaps understand but not read and write. And because they come from this context, and because those students also had limited familiarity with Urdu for very different reasons, a real range of reasons, it was a whole new box of fun challenges. Kind of an interesting shift. Thank you for that comment, Ian. Really appreciate it.
So I might take this opportunity to wrap up for us, if that's okay with all of you. It was really wonderful. So thank all of you for making all the various time zones work for you. We here in Australia are kind of at the beginning / edge of the world, so it often is hard to make things work that way. Thank you for making time for your individual interviews, which will be online in the future, and we'll put that on whatever kind of platform we develop to work together globally as teachers of South Asian languages. And this video itself for this roundtable will also be going up once it's rendered in the cloud. Thank you for all of our attendees for listening very attentively. I know a lot of you were here from the beginning, and thank you for your questions and for the resources you pointed out. So Just thank you very much. If there are any questions from attendees, please, somewhere in the box, in the chat box, I've typed my email address. And I think I did Peter's as well. So you can just email us and then we can connect you onwards to anyone here. I know some of you have also typed your email addresses. And hopefully there's more of this to come in the future.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris and Peter and everyone. Bahut bahut dhanyavad.
It was so lovely to like meet old friends and also new ones. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think I said it in my interview also, but online teaching could also be really isolating. So I think it is also just good to learn about how other people are handling this transition and what are things that have worked, and also just share our misery likes company. So it feels a little better that everybody is learning to do it, on the job. So thank you for offering this space.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking part as well, because yes, I think sharing is such an important part. At the moment, we're also isolated because of the situations around the world. So it's good if we can find any way to come together. And I think this is something very valuable. And yeah, it's difficult for the students, it's difficult for us. And we can find ways to get together internationally because of the way that the situation has developed at the moment for many of us, you know, whether you were in one part of Melbourne or another, it would be no difference, I guess, Ian, whether you were in another city or in the people. And so it's wonderful to all meet together in this global community and think about the kind of issues which are facing us. But I really hope as well that this is the beginning of something, different ways in which we can share global and locally as well. I always think the two things are the same. In the end, the world is only quite a small place. Let's hope that we can find ways to all live together and share. And I really was struck tonight by Ian, you talking about the way that the situation makes us think about what we're really doing when we're teaching. And it really does. It makes me think about the way that we're actually, I think I confused people at another meeting by saying, well, actually teaching is about helping students to engage with negotiating their identity in the world. And that's probably one of the main wonderful things about teaching. It's the opportunity to take part in all the students constructing their own identities. And obviously with something like Hindi-Urdu, it's something about what their relationship is to several cultures at once. So it's something very exciting to be investigating on all of this. It's been a great pleasure. And Chris, thank you so much as well for all of the incredible coordination of everything.
My pleasure. So unfortunately, we don't get to do the nice bits of an academic event, which is kind of lingering in a room way longer than you should. Once I click end, the screen will just go blank, but please look forward to a follow-up email from me, and let's all chat in the future.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
फिर मिलेंगे.
फिर
जल्दी से
मिलेंगे.
मिलेंगे.
बिल्कुल जल्दी. फिर मिलेंगे.
Till next time.
Yeah.
Thank you guys again so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.